The email arrived at 4:02 p.m., buried between a sprint update and a catering request for Friday's leadership mixer. The subject line was Sterile Recruitment Committee Update. The message itself was worse. Effective immediately, you are no longer part of the recruitment committee. No greeting, no explanation, just the cold sting of being quietly erased. I stared at the screen for a moment, wondering if there was more to come. A call, a meeting, a sentence acknowledging 10 years of building the hiring framework that kept our engineering team stable, loyal, and high-performing. Nothing followed. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, like it too couldn't believe how abruptly it ended. Outside my office glass, the bullpen buzzed with the usual late-afternoon rhythm fingers clacking across keyboards, someone laughing near the coffee station, that soft, white noise hum of machines doing their work. It all felt distant, muffled. I reached for my mug, the ceramic still warm from the refill I hadn't touched, and took a sip that tasted like disappointment. Braden Thorne. That was the source of this. New VP of Operation Sharp Jaw Expensive Watch, and enough corporate buzzwords to script a TED Talk. He'd been here barely 3 months and already had a vision for agile transformation. His favorite phrase, "We can't scale with red tape." And I apparently had become the red tape. I stood and walked toward the main floor, passing the rows of desks where engineers I'd personally hired now sat immersed in code. Trevin, who I fought to bring in after another manager dismissed his community college background. Emery, who cried during her third-round interview because she thought she blew it and whom I later promoted. Callum, who came to us after his last team imploded and finally found a place that didn't burn him out. They didn't know what just happened. They smiled at me, waved. I smiled back mechanically, the way you might nod at someone in the hallway after learning your name's been crossed off a door. Back at my desk, I opened the shared hiring folder out of habit. Then I paused. My access had already been revoked. Just like that. I closed the laptop lid gently and folded my hands in my lap. If they wanted to move fast, I thought they'd better be ready for what happens when no one's watching the road. By Thursday morning, the Glasshouse conference room had transformed into a launch pad. Braden stood at the head of the sleek table, sleeves rolled up like a general preparing for battle. Behind him, a flat screen displayed the words Rapid Response Hiring Initiative in bold neon blue. The irony wasn't lost on me. It sounded more like a disaster recovery team than a recruitment committee. Flanking him were the new faces of Apex Forge hiring. Kellen Price, all charm and urgency, fresh out of a tech accelerator, and clinging to his tablet like a lifeline. He spoke in acronyms and dashboard metrics, preaching time to fill like it was scripture. Then there was Audra Gentry from finance, whose expression rarely shifted above mildly disapproving. She was there to ensure offers stayed lean and market efficient. And finally, the crown jewel Zeno, an AI-powered chatbot that would now handle first-round resume reviews and behavioral screening. A robot with a 3% false positive rate, Braden claimed proudly. Faster than any human. The shift was immediate. Applications that once took a week to move between stages now zipped through the system in hours. Interviews scheduled within 24 hours. Candidate packets reduced to one-page scorecards. Braden beamed in the break room, declaring to anyone listening, "We're cutting the fat. No more hand-holding." From my corner office, I watched them work. The flurry of meetings, the Slack pings labeled urgent, the emails marked ASAP. I heard laughter through the glass, quick decisions being made over coffee. They were moving fast, impossibly fast, but speed had a cost. I saw Kellen scan resumes without opening attachments, Audra skim numbers without noting gaps, and Zeno didn't ask why a talented software engineer took a 9-month break after their last startup failed. It just flagged the candidate low match. I said nothing. Not yet. I wasn't there to interfere. I was there to observe, and I was already starting to see the cracks. It wasn't the wrong hires that worried me. It was how certain they all seemed that nothing could go wrong. Late Friday evening, I found myself in the hallway printer room, waiting for a stack of sprint briefs I didn't need. Old habits die hard, like printing out physical packets to manually annotate. But it wasn't the documents I was watching. It was the hiring dashboard open on the spare workstation behind me, left on by someone in a rush. My eyes scanned down the list until one name made me pause. Luca Denning. His application summary looked pristine, ex-Google clean. GitHub activity glowing automated scoring by Zeno. But there it was a gap. A 6-month hole between two positions that should have raised more than an eyebrow. It wasn't the gap itself. People take time off. It was the way his resume buried its smoothing dates to disguise the break, as if hoping no one would dig deeper. In my system, that would have triggered a second reference check. Sometimes even a call to a quiet source, someone they didn't list. I clicked the internal feedback button embedded in the bottom corner of the dashboard. Even though I'd been locked out of my full access, the company-wide portal for anonymous input was still open. I typed plainly, "Resume concern candidate Luca Denning has a 6-month employment gap not accounted for. Recommend deeper background check before offer. No drama, no accusations. Just a quiet ripple sent upstream." I never received a reply. I didn't expect one. 3 days later, I was eating lunch alone in the break room when Braden walked in, holding a foil balloon that said, "Welcome, rock star." Luca followed behind him, shaking hands and flashing a smile that was just a little too polished. Kellen stood near the espresso machine, beaming like he'd discovered fire. Audra had already updated the comp table in the shared folder, murmuring about how they'd saved 6% on equity by moving quickly. That evening, out of curiosity, I checked the status of my submission. It had been tagged "Low Priority Resolved" by AI filter. No human review required. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. Then I closed the browser and started documenting everything in a folder I named Parallel Reviews. I didn't know what I'd need yet, but something told me I'd need it soon. It was nearly 6:00 p.m. when I heard the knock, 3 soft taps on my office door, hesitant but intentional. I looked up to see Amara Singh, hovering at the threshold like she wasn't sure if she should step in. I waved her inside. Imara had joined Apex Forge fresh out of grad school 2 years ago. She was quiet, methodical, the kind of engineer who rarely needed managing. I'd interviewed her personally, mentored her through her first deployment, and watched her grow into a quiet pillar of the mobile dev team. She rarely came to me unless it mattered. She closed the door gently behind her. "Sorry, I didn't know who else to talk to." I set down my pen. "Take your time." She glanced toward the hallway before speaking. "It's Luca. He's been asking for stuff." My pulse ticked up. What kind of stuff? She shifted uncomfortably. Like admin credentials, full access logs, said he needed them to run cross-system stress tests. But he's front end, and that's not even our domain. I let the silence stretch between us. He also asked about how our CI/CD pipeline stores build artifacts, and which servers are cloud-managed versus on-prem. Just odd questions. "Did you report it to your manager?" I asked. "No, he's part of Braden's team now. I figured it'd just get brushed off." I nodded slowly. "Document everything, names times wording. Keep it offline, print a copy, email one to your personal address, just in case." Imara hesitated. "Am I overreacting?" "No," I said. "You're paying attention." She thanked me in a whisper, then slipped out as quietly as she came. The next morning, I saw her name flash in a Slack status change, currently in HR. 2 hours later, she walked past my office, face pale, jaw clenched. She didn't look at me. Later that day, I heard from a friend in payroll that Imara had been issued a verbal warning for creating an atmosphere of distrust. It went on her record lightly but formally. That evening, I added a new tab to my Parallel Reviews folder. I titled it Silenced Flags. It was a Friday morning when Braden burst into my office without knocking. The door slammed against the wall, sending a framed certificate rattling on its hook. His face was drained of color. His shirt wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and his tie hung loose, half untied. He tried to download the client database. He said, breathless, Luca. At 2:14 a.m., I didn't say anything. I just set down my pen and waited. Security caught it mid-transfer. He continued pacing like a man searching for the edges of a fire. The firewall flagged the data size and blocked the connection. But he'd already accessed the files, code bases, client contact lists, some financials. We don't know how much he got. I let that settle. He's been with us, 11 days, Braden asked, like the math might excuse the fallout. 12, I corrected. His hands flew into his hair. Ite started digging. Ran a full trace. Turns out Luca Denning isn't his real name. Real name's Caleb Varelli. 2 convictions for corporate fraud, wire transfers, internal theft. Last time he was caught trying to sell proprietary source code. I said nothing. The 6-month resume gap, he added quietly. It wasn't travel, it was prison. He looked at me then as if expecting outrage, accusation, even triumph. I gave him none of it. How was he cleared by background, I asked instead. We used a speed vendor, Quick Check Global. They only screened the last 3 years to keep costs down. He winced. Our AI system flagged him clean. I opened my drawer and handed him a folder titled Candidate L. Denning. Flagged. Inside was a printed copy of the feedback I'd submitted, time-stamped. Below it, a screenshot, low priority. No human review required. Braden stared at it in silence. He had admin-level access, he said finally. Full repo privileges, sandbox, bypass, limited encryption keys. All granted on day 3. I felt the weight of those words, not just for what they revealed, but what they threatened to unravel. Braden didn't leave my office for another 5 minutes. He stood there, shoulders slumped, mouth half open, like he might still argue with reality, but there was nothing left to say. I turned back to my screen and opened the folder labeled Exposure Map. Braden came back 2 hours later, but this time he knocked. 3 wraps tight, controlled like he was trying to remind himself how authority was supposed to sound. I told him to come in. He walked in slow, sat without being asked. His voice was low now, drained of the thunder from earlier. I need to understand how this happened. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a slim black folder. No flair, no labels, just substance. I placed it between us on the desk and flipped it open. The first page, a printout of my original anonymous warning about Luca, complete with timestamp and routing log, showing exactly how it had been filed away by the automation system and never reviewed by human eyes. The second, a cross-check I ran between Luca's provided history and public code repository activity. The timestamps didn't align. His GitHub showed nothing for almost 7 months. No forks, no commits, not even passive interaction. The third printed notes verbatim of the conversation I'd had with Imara. Dates. Times. Her account of Luca's behavior and the aftermath she endured for speaking up. Braden didn't touch the folder. He stared at the contents like they might bite him. "You've been doing this on your own?" he asked. "I've been doing what I've always done," I said, reviewing what matters even if the access is gone. I slid the final document across to him. It was a spreadsheet coded red, yellow, and green. Every candidate hired under the new system. Most were clean. 2 others had incomplete academic histories, one with a false certification, one with a flagged LinkedIn endorsement tied to a fake profile. "I call it my parallel review," I said. "It's not official. Yet." Braden leaned back in the chair. He looked thinner than usual, as if something inside him had been burned out and left hollow. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. "Legal's involved now. We're facing breach disclosure. Possible regulatory violations." I said nothing. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to contain the fallout. "I need your help," he whispered. And I already knew exactly what I would ask for in return. Braden showed up the next morning at 8:10 a.m., holding a legal pad and nothing else. No ego, no posturing. Just a man with paperwork and the face of someone who hadn't slept. He didn't sit this time. He stood in front of my desk like a student asking for a retake. "We need to restore the process," he said, "and I want you to lead it." I let the silence stretch until he looked up to meet my eyes. On my terms, I replied. He nodded. "Of course. I want full hiring authority reinstated. No oversight, no shared control with ops or finance. Done. No more Xeno. No AI-led filters without manual review." He hesitated just for a beat, then nodded again. "Done. And I want a written apology, delivered in person to the entire engineering staff. No buzzwords, just accountability." His jaw tightened, but he agreed. "I'll make it happen." I pushed a document across the desk. One more thing. External audit. Not just Luca. All 7 hires made under rapid response. That one landed harder. Braden blinked. All 7. "If we're cleaning house, we do it completely." He sighed, then signed the bottom of the request. "I'll contact compliance today." I waited until he left before locking the door behind him. By the end of the week, the audit was underway. 2 hires came back with minor issues. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to raise eyebrows. One had faked a software certification that had expired 5 years ago. Another had exaggerated their prior role from junior analyst to lead architect. I flagged both records, updated their teams discreetly, and made a note to schedule performance reviews. Braden didn't argue. He didn't interfere. He sat quietly in meetings, now nodded at process timelines, and deferred to my judgment with the caution of someone who'd touched fire once and learned it could burn. That Monday, I stood in front of the engineering team in the main auditorium while Braden stepped forward, apology in hand, voice trembling just slightly, as he admitted to the failure and to who had tried to prevent it. Afterward, no one clapped. They didn't need to. They just turned to me and nodded, and then we got back to work. The first thing I did was wipe the slate. The rapid response model was officially shelved, its dashboards archived, its workflows removed from onboarding. We started again, not from scratch, but from something that had worked, something earned. We reinstated 10-year background checks, not 3. Every new candidate went through 2 technical interviews and 1 culture fit conversation with cross-functional staff. Peer reviews became mandatory for final round decisions. No more resume scoring bots. No more urgency disguised as progress. Audra quietly moved back to finance. I saw her in the break room 2 days later reviewing quarterly projections, a spreadsheet open and a pencil in hand. She didn't make eye contact, but she looked steady. Kellen, on the other hand, requested stress leave by the end of the week. I heard he'd been taking anxiety medication ever since the breach surfaced. I didn't judge him for that. People break in different ways. Imara was the one I kept close. I asked her to join a confidential internal circle engineers who could review red flag behavior quietly outside bureaucracy. No formal title, just trust. She accepted, and I saw a small part of her shoulders relax when I handed her the internal access key card she thought she'd never earn. People didn't say much at first. There were no grand statements or declarations of relief, but I noticed the difference. Developers stayed later, not because they had to, but because they wanted to finish clean builds. Code reviews got sharper. Stand-ups had more energy. I caught glimpses of something returning belief, not just in leadership, but in the system again. I also made one private change. Every flagged resume that came across our desk went into a folder, marked Pause Not Rejected. I told my team, investigate, don't discard. Not every gap is guilt. Not every story fits cleanly in a checkbox. 3 weeks into the reset, we got our first serious applicant under the new structure. A woman named Cressida Vale, senior cybersecurity lead with 8 years of experience, and more questions than answers on her CV. I scheduled her first interview myself. Cressida Vale moved through the interview process like someone who'd already seen the worst of what companies could ignore. Her resume wasn't flashy, but it was dense: 8 years in cybersecurity, 2 Fortune 100 firms, and 1 counterintelligence contract she couldn't publicly name. Every answer she gave during technical vetting was precise without showmanship. When asked about gaps, she was honest. When pressed, she pressed back calmly. 12 days from application to offer. No corners cut. Every reference called, every license verified. We gave her time to ask questions, and she took all of it. The kind of candidate who interviews the company as much as we interview her. She joined the team on a Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, she sent me an encrypted message: "I need 20 minutes, no interruptions." I cleared my calendar. We met in my office. She showed me 3 access logs, subtle, almost buried, pointing to leftover backdoor scripts buried in legacy code, installed most likely by Luca during his first week. They were inactive but dangerously well hidden, designed to lie dormant until triggered remotely. We brought in IT immediately. By the end of the day, Cressida had not only found the remnants of the breach, she'd outlined containment protocols and submitted a detailed memo to legal and compliance. No panic, no flare, just a seasoned professional doing what she was trained to do. Within a month, she led a full internal audit. Her team discovered 2 more vulnerabilities, both unrelated to Luca, but just as concerning. She called them ghosts, leftovers from old infrastructure no one had reviewed in years. Her report was uncomfortable, necessary, and surgical. The board personally thanked her. Braden did too, twice. But Cressida didn't care for praise. She cared about process. When she knocked at my door one Friday to ask about forming a permanent internal risk unit, I told her to write the charter herself. She did. It was in my inbox by Monday morning. I approved it without changes. A week later, I received a message from an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. 6 months passed quietly. The company stabilized. Client trust rebuilt itself, 1 audit, 1 patch, 1 honest update at a time. We didn't issue press releases or spin campaigns. We just worked methodically, relentlessly. Then one morning, a LinkedIn message appeared in my inbox. The sender was Gina Ainsworth, a director of engineering at a fintech firm in San Francisco. We'd crossed paths once at a conference years ago. She'd been sharp confident, surrounded by execs who believed fast was always better. Her message was short. Leadership wants us to hire faster, cut vetting, automate screening, advice. I reread it twice. Then I typed back, "Speed makes headlines. Accuracy makes legacies." I didn't elaborate. She didn't need me to. That afternoon, I stood in front of our newest onboarding group, 7 hires from 5 different states, all brought in under the restored system. Some were seasoned, some were fresh. All had been carefully vetted, not just for skill, but for who they were when no one was watching. They listened as I walked through our onboarding values, but I paused before the last slide. "You're here because the process worked," I said. "Not because you gamed the algorithm or keyword matched a resume or got flagged by a scoring bot. Someone took the time to read your story and you gave us something real." I looked out at them, remembering how easy it had been for things to nearly fall apart. Systems are boring until they save you. Don't forget that. No one clapped. No one needed to. They just looked steady, present. I stepped away from the podium and walked out into the hallway, the sound of their badges activating behind me. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is insist on what works.